You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. On today's episode of the podcast, we review match number 13 of the ICC T20 World Cup for 2022 between Australia and New Zealand from the SCG. It's the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast, and let's get started. Let's have a look at the match summary from game number 13 of this ICC T20 World Cup for 2022 between Australia and New Zealand from the SCG. New Zealand batted first and made 3 for 200 from their 20 overs. Devon Conway top scored with 92, and Josh Hazlewood took 2 wickets for Australia. Australia needed 201 runs to win. They were bowled out for 111 from 17.1 overs. Glenn Maxwell top scored with 28, and Tim Southee and Mitchell Santner both took 3 wickets each for New Zealand. New Zealand won by 89 runs, and Devon Conway was named Player of the Match. What were the key moments and key factors from match number 13 of the ICC T20 World Cup for 2022 between Australia and New Zealand? Finn Allen and Devon Conway's partnership of 56 for the first wicket set the tone for New Zealand, applying pressure back onto the Australian bowlers. Kane Williamson and Devon Conway's partnership of 69 for the second wicket was able to keep the pressure on the Australian bowlers. Those partnerships between Allen and Conway, 56 for the first wicket, Williamson and Conway, 69 for the second wicket, helped New Zealand post a competitive total of 3 for 200 from their 20 overs. New Zealand's bowling taking wickets at regular intervals during the Australian innings to bowl Australia out for 111 from 17.1 overs and helped New Zealand to win by 89 runs. Those were the key moments and key factors from match number 13 of the ICC T20 World Cup for 2022 between Australia and New Zealand from the SCG. Let's have a look at both teams' performances in match number 13 of this ICC T20 World Cup for 2022 between Australia and New Zealand at the SCG with both bat and ball. We'll start with Australia and their batters: Warner 5, Finch 13, Mitchell Marsh 16, Maxwell 28, Stoinis 7, David 11 and Wade 2. That's how the Australian batters performed in this T20 World Cup match against New Zealand at the SCG in this Super 12 stage of the tournament. You have to say it was a pretty poor batting performance from Australia. There's no bare bones about that. It was a pathetic performance with the batting, I have to say. Not up to standard from this Australian team and from the defending champions of the T20 World Cup. Chasing 201 for the Australian batters was always going to be a challenge for any batting side in T20 cricket. Australia didn't get going at all in the run chase, and it was sort of a stop-start sort of innings. It didn't really go anywhere. They didn't really have any momentum. No one really did the basics well. Batting collapse, top order failing again, poor shot selection. It was just very poor across the board. They lost wickets at regular intervals throughout the whole innings. They were 1 for 5, 2 for 30, 3 for 34, 4 for 50, 5 for 68, 6 for 82, 7 for 89, 8 for 109, 9 for 109, and all out for 111. Didn't build any partnerships at all with the bat. 5, 25, 4, 16, 18, 14, 7, 20, 0, and 2. So that tells you the story about Australia's batting against New Zealand in this match at the SCG in this T20 World Cup. As I said, no momentum. No one really did the basics well. And we talk about that a lot from Australia in recent times about batting collapses. Once again, the top order collapsed. So David Warner, Aaron Finch, Mitchell Marsh, Glenn Maxwell, the top order collapsed again. And no one really stuck at it and really negotiated the bowling from New Zealand. And just crumbled under the pressure, really. We see it time and time again from Australia. Batting collapses. In the lead up to this T20 World Cup, the series that they played against India, the West Indies and England, before this tournament started, they've had a problem with batting collapses. and they've lost wickets in clumps. And we saw that in this game against New Zealand, which doesn't really help when you're chasing a total of 201. And by losing wickets in clumps and at regular intervals, what that does is put pressure on the rest of the batting order, like the batters of Maxwell, Stoinis, David, and Matthew Wade. It puts a lot of pressure on the middle order to get the job done, where the top order has failed from Warner, Finch, and Mitchell Marsh, who did not really get in and get set. When you're chasing 201 and losing wickets, and you're 4 down for 50 odd inside the power play or just outside of the power play for Australia, you're not going to come back from that, and that's the game done. And that's what happened with Australia in this match. There's nothing much to add on to it, really. It was just poor across the board. And Australia will really have to address these problems going forward into the next match of this T20 World Cup against Sri Lanka in Perth on Tuesday. They will really have to think as a batting group, what can we do better? Well, there's a lot of things they can do better. Number one, be smart about the batting and don't be reckless. And that's just about just doing the basics right. Look to build a partnership. Look to rotate the strike. Pick the gaps. Run hard between the wickets. Look to get in, get set. And be measured about what sort of shots you're going to score runs off or play against certain types of bowlers. And with Australia, there's no smartness, there's no plan against any of the opposition bowlers in terms of how we're going to score runs and how we're going to do it. It's sort of like, it's a bit, we've got to hit out or get out. In T20 cricket, it's not about hitting the ball big. You can play very good cricket shots and score runs. We've seen that from many great players in T20 cricket where you can do that. And the Australian team know that with this batting lineup. But it was very poor, as I said. So the areas of improvement for Australia going into the next game against Sri Lanka, they really have to stop the batting collapses. The top order has to dig in, do its job, do the basics, set the platform, set the foundation, either trying to set a total and a target for the opposition to chase down, or when they're in a run chase type situation, set a good foundation and platform for the middle order to come in and finish off the job. Australia, they've been inconsistent with their batting, and it is a bit of a concern, because if they keep going down this route throughout this tournament, they're not going to win this T20 World Cup if they keep batting like this. So hopefully, Australia will learn the lessons from this game against New Zealand and look to turn the batting woes around and look for a good batting performance against Sri Lanka in a couple of days' time in Perth and look to get back on track in this T20 World Cup, because the batting performance we saw here in Game 1 for them for this tournament was a very poor batting performance across the board. So overall, it was a poor batting performance from Australia in this game against New Zealand. Let's have a look at Australia's bowlers and their performance in this T20 World Cup match against New Zealand at the SCG and talk about how they went about things with the ball. No wickets for Stoinis, Cummins, Stark, and a wicket for Samper, and 2 wickets for Hazlewood. That's how the Australian bowlers went about things in this T20 World Cup match against New Zealand at the SCG. Australia's bowling, it's a very good attack, as we all know, the likes of Cummins, Stark, Zampa and Hazlewood. Unfortunately, in this game against New Zealand, it was a pretty poor performance from the bowling group. Australia's bowlers were put under tremendous pressure by the New Zealand batters. New Zealand, their batters were looking to be aggressive and putting the pressure back on the Australian bowlers and making the Australian bowlers change their plans and just putting them under pressure. And the Australian bowlers did not handle the pressure all that well. They leaked runs, didn't build pressure with the ball, didn't bowl consistent lines and lengths, didn't execute their skills with the ball. And they were a bit off in all those departments, Australia. And they were leaking runs, they were too expensive, and New Zealand just kept scoring runs over after over, and the Australian bowlers had no answers whatsoever. So leading up to this tournament, in the T20 series that Australia have played against India, the West Indies, and England before this T20 World Cup, Australia have had some problems with their bowling as well as their batting. Now, we've already talked about the batting problems earlier. The bowling problems is pretty much the deaf bowling. The death bowling against New Zealand in this game was poor as well, leaking runs, not quite executing the plans and the skills with the ball. So it's something that Australia need to improve on for the rest of this tournament. They need to improve their death bowling. They can't afford to leak runs at the death. In this game against New Zealand were able to get a score over 200 plus because of Australia's death bowling at the end. It didn't quite hit the mark. It wasn't to the standard that we associate with those types of bowlers that Australia have, with Stark, Cummins, and Hazlewood in particular, who bowl at the death. So the Australian bowling was off. And I think the way that the New Zealand batters batted against them, putting pressure back on them, really set them back. And they couldn't really quite recover from that moment on. And they didn't really have the answers, really. So Australia's bowling, there's a little bit of a concern there in terms of not really building pressure with the ball. Not bowling dot balls, not building pressure with dots, not bowling consistent lines and lengths to build pressure on the batters. Their death bowling is off, not quite firing. The likes of Cummins has been expensive. He went at 11.5 runs per over in this game. Mitchell Stark was off the boil. He went for 9 and over. Adam Zampa took a wicket, but he went for 9 runs and over. Josh Hazlewood took 2 wickets, going at 10 runs and over. So he was off the mark as well. And we know Josh Hazlewood has had a remarkable few months in T20 cricket to a year. He's really reinvented himself as a bowler, I should say. But unfortunately, he's just been expensive at the moment. So Australia have got some problems that they need to address going into the next game against Sri Lanka, which is in Perth. And I think going into the next game against Sri Lanka in Perth, I think playing on a surface that's got a lot more bounce and carry and pace. And I think the Australian bowlers will love bowling in Perth. And hopefully for the Australian bowlers, they'll get back to some sort of their best in the game against Sri Lanka, because they got to really turn things around quickly with the ball. They can't keep going like this with the bowling. As we say in cricket, batters put you in good positions to try and win a game. It's up to the bowlers to try and finish the game off and win the game by taking wickets and defending whatever score you make in the end. So for the bowling for Australia, it's a quality attack. It's just off the boil at the moment, and they need to start firing. And hopefully, by learning from this performance against New Zealand, and also learning what's happened before in the lead up to this T20 World Cup, they will try and make the adjustments, and hopefully they'll have a better performance going into the game against Sri Lanka in Perth in a few days' time. Also, they only took 3 wickets in the New Zealand innings, and that's a bit of a concern as well. Australia are not picking up wickets at regular intervals. Now, we know in T20 cricket, you pick up wickets at regular intervals, it puts the opposition under pressure. Therefore, the opposition have to try harder to try and score runs, knowing that we don't have much time left. We keep losing wickets. We really need to accelerate. And there, you can really put teams under pressure. Unfortunately for Australia, they didn't quite do that against New Zealand. They only took 3 wickets. Josh Hazlewood took 2 wickets. Adam Zampa took 1. And the rest of the bowlers did not take a wicket. So that's a concern for Australia. They can't seem to pick up wickets at regular intervals when they need to. So that's something that they need to look at going into the game against Sri Lanka in Perth in a couple of days' time. But overall, it was a poor bowling performance from Australia. And overall, it was a poor performance from Australia to begin this ICC T20 World Cup for 2022. Let's have a look at New Zealand's team performance with both bat and ball in match number 13 of this ICC T20 World Cup for 2022 between Australia and New Zealand at the SCG. We'll start with their batters. Allen, 42, Conway, 92 not out, Williamson, 23, Phillips, 12, and Neesham, 26 not out. That's how the New Zealand batters went about things in this T20 World Cup match against Australia at the SCG. New Zealand's batting in this game against Australia was very good. I thought they batted really well. Reaching 3 for 200 from their 20 overs was a good score and put New Zealand in the box seat in this match against Australia. In the end, 200 was a very good score, and New Zealand were able to get the job done and win this game to begin their tournament off on a winning note. They didn't lose wickets at regular intervals, New Zealand. They only lost 3 wickets for the whole entire innings. That was Allen, Phillips and and Williamson, who departed. So by not losing wickets at regular intervals, it really helped New Zealand to maintain the scoring rate and to post a score of 200 on a very good surface at the SCG, as we saw in this game to begin the Super 12 stage between Australia and New Zealand. As I said, didn't lose wickets at regular intervals, which really helped them. They built partnerships nicely. 56 for the first wicket between Allen and Conway, 69 for the second wicket between Williamson and Conway, 48 unbeaten for the fourth wicket between Neesham and Conway. Were all good partnerships for New Zealand and helped them to reach that 200 plus score, which really put them in a good position in this game. I noticed something different from this New Zealand team in terms of the batting, and we associate New Zealand teams, when they come to Australia, they don't really do well. And I think New Zealand had a point to prove in this game against Australia. Obviously, we've seen over the years when New Zealand come over for bilateral series, test matches or ODIs or T20s, they don't have great success. And with New Zealand, they had that on their backs coming into this game against Australia. But I thought it was a different attitude from New Zealand. They were really aggressive with their batting. They really took it to the Australian bowlers. And we don't see that when New Zealand play Australia in Australia. And it's something that New Zealand have dealt with for many, many years, is that they have this mental, psychological battle where they don't seem to do well in Australia. They can't seem to beat Australia in their own backyard. And we saw a few months ago when New Zealand were here last time, a few months ago, during the ODI series in Queensland, in Cairns. They lost that series 3-0. The batting in that series was a bit timid. It wasn't aggressive. Lack of positive intent. Obviously different formats, ODIs to T20s, but you could see that New Zealand did not have that killer blow, especially against Australia in Australia. But come this game, obviously a big game to kick off the T20 World Cup, the Super 12 stage, an important game for both teams. New Zealand decided, you know what, we're going to be aggressive. We're not going to be pushed around any longer by this Australian team, and we've got a point to prove. We want to show people that we're not going to be pushed around. And their batsmen and their batters in particular did that. All of them were aggressive, especially Finn Allen. And I want to talk about him a little bit. I thought he set the tone for the New Zealand batting innings. He came out, used his feet, put Hazelwood, Stark and Cummins off their lines and lengths by charging down the pitch and carving them for runs all around the SCG, hitting them over the rope for 6, hitting them to the boundary for 4. His partnership with Devon Conway really set the tone for New Zealand in their batting innings, and they didn't really look back ever since after that great start. That partnership of 56, it was only 56 runs, but it did more damage than you thought by being aggressive and putting pressure onto the Australian bowlers. And then the other two partnerships between Williamson and Conway, 69 for the second wicket, 48 unbeaten for the fourth wicket between Neesham and Conway, was pretty much the icing on the cake and got New Zealand to that 200 plus score in their 20 overs. In the end, that was enough to win the game easily by 89 runs. But I just wanted to touch on that aggressive approach from New Zealand because there was something different, something that I never really saw before from any New Zealand team when they've come to Australia. They always seem to be a bit timid in their cricket. And New Zealand by nature are not an aggressive team compared to Australia, for example, who are an aggressive team and like to be aggressive and like to be in your face and all that stuff. New Zealand are not like that. But I thought tonight, in this game, a big game to start the tournament, they just said, you know what, we've been pushed around for too long and we're just going to go out there, be aggressive and put the pressure back on to the Australian bowlers, and they did. And the batting group did their job and they did it well. And they executed their plan, which was to put the Australian bowlers under pressure, and they did that very well. Devon Conway, let's talk about him. I thought his innings of 92 was splendid. I thought he batted magnificently. A very skillful player, we know, Devon Conway. He's a very good player. In all three formats of the game, he can get the job done with the bat. Opening the batting for New Zealand in this T20 side, I thought he batted well. He held the innings together. Very important to have someone to hold the innings together like the glue, so everyone else can bat around that particular batter who's in and who's doing the anchor role. Something that Australia lacked in their innings, New Zealand did it well in their innings. Someone who stayed in throughout the whole innings, a set batter, and the other batters who were coming in were able just to tee off and score runs, knowing that we've already had a set batter in at the crease already. So I thought he did his role quite well, Devon Conway, and he's definitely going to be important for New Zealand going forward in this T20 World Cup. So overall, it was a good batting performance from New Zealand. I was very impressed with how they went about things, and hopefully, for the batting group, they can do much more damage for the remainder of this T20 World Cup. Let's have a look at the New Zealand bowlers and talk about their performance in this T20 World Cup match against Australia at the SCG. 3 wickets for Santner, a wicket each for Sodhi and Ferguson, 3 wickets for Southey and 2 wickets for Boult. That's how the New Zealand bowlers went about things in this match against Australia at the SCG. I thought New Zealand's bowling was very good. They took wickets at regular intervals throughout the Australian innings. They bowled a lot of dot balls. They built pressure on the Australian batters. They bowled consistent line and length. They executed their skills well with the ball. And it's good signs for New Zealand going forward that the bowlers are taking wickets and everyone's contributing in some shape or form in this bowling attack. And I thought they bowled very well. They were able to learn from the Australian innings and saw how the Australian bowlers went about things in their innings, and they said, right, okay, let's make these adjustments here. If we make these adjustments and take early wickets, we can definitely cause some damage. And they did. They took wickets up front. Tim Southey was good, 3 for 6. Very good figures from him. Mitchell Santner took 3 wickets as well. Ish Sodhi with 1, Ferguson with 1, and Boult 2. So it was a very good all-round performance from the New Zealand bowlers. Everyone contributed in some shape or form, as I mentioned before, and that's good signs for them going forward in this T20 World Cup. I thought they did the basics well with the ball. They took wickets in the power play. They took wickets in the middle overs, I should say. They took wickets at the death, and they were able to bowl Australia out for 111, which is a pretty good result after making 200. So very good signs for New Zealand going forward. I think their bowling's pretty good. Obviously for them, it's just about to be consistent and building consistency with this bowling group. We all know that these bowlers can take wickets and cause damage on any given day. Obviously, they're going to rely heavily on Trent Boult, in particular, obviously, with the new balls swinging up front, taking those early wickets in the power play. But you've also got Southey and Sodhi and Santner and Ferguson who've done very well. And they're going to play an important role as well to support Trent Boult. But looking at this bowling performance against Australia in this game for New Zealand, very good bowling performance. As I mentioned, did the basics well. They showed the Australian bowlers how to bowl on this pitch at the SCG. And the Australian bowlers can learn a thing or two from what they saw from the New Zealand bowlers on how to bowl on this pitch. And as we know with Australia, they've had some problems with their bowling in the lead up to this tournament. Whereas New Zealand, their bowling, they always seem to get the job done and take wickets when needed. So a very good bowling performance from New Zealand in this game against Australia. So overall, it was a good bowling performance from New Zealand. Let's preview Australia and New Zealand's next matches of this ICC T20 World Cup for 2022 and talk about the potential 11s for both teams. We'll start with Australia. Their next match is against Sri Lanka. That will be at the Perth Stadium on October the 25th. And it's going to be a very important game for Australia. They have to win to bounce back after this disappointing result against New Zealand here at the SCG. So that game against Sri Lanka in Perth will be their next match. What sort of 11 we're talking about for Australia? What's their potential 11? I think they'll keep the same 11. I think Australia, the 11 that they've selected is probably their best 11 they've got with the squad that they have. It's a very good team. But in the recent series, in the lead up to this tournament, and even in this first game against New Zealand to kick off the tournament, they haven't seemed to be firing on all cylinders. There's still a lot of areas to work on with the batting and the bowling side of things. But you would think Australia would learn from that and bounce back. So I think the selectors will show the faith and keep the same 11. I think I think it's very easy just to make changes for the sake of it and just say, well, we lost badly against New Zealand by 89 runs. We've got to change the whole team. I don't think that's the right way to go about things. If you want to build consistency and cohesion within the team, you've got to keep the same players in to build that consistency and to build that unity and rhythm in the team. If you make changes, then it will just upset the team even more and you will lose momentum. For Australia, it's all about trying to get momentum and trying to get back on track in this tournament. So I think they'll keep the same 11 for their next game against Sri Lanka. So their potential 11 for the game against Sri Lanka in Perth could be Warner, Finch, Mitchell Marsh, Maxwell, Stoinis, David, Wade, Cummins, Stark, Zampa, and Hazelwood. Let's have a look at New Zealand's potential 11 for their next match against Afghanistan, which is at the MCG on October the 26th. Now, for New Zealand, I think they'll keep the same 11 for the game against Afghanistan, which will be on October the 26th at the MCG. I think this 11 that New Zealand have selected, I think it's a very good 11 that they've selected. It's a very good batting lineup and a very good bowling attack. So I think it's important for New Zealand not to make changes for the sake of it, because you don't want to make changes and chop and change the team and interrupt the momentum and cohesion within the team. So I don't think they'll change the team in any shape or form. If there's something that they feel like that needs to have a bit of a change, then by all means do that. Depending on conditions or someone gets injured or something like that, you may consider a change to the 11. But if I was the New Zealand selectors, I'd probably keep the same 11 for the next game against Afghanistan in Melbourne. Now, you would think New Zealand, they're probably, will be looking to improve and get better from this game against Australia going into the game against Afghanistan. But I think for New Zealand, they can't be complacent against Afghanistan. Afghanistan can be a team that can cause an upset on any given day. So New Zealand will have to be on their game against Afghanistan. But I think New Zealand should be able to get the job done and probably get the points over Afghanistan. But we should wait and see what happens. As we know in T20 cricket, it's unpredictable and we never know what's going to happen. Whoever can execute on the day will win the match. So the potential 11 for New Zealand heading into their next match against Afghanistan at the MCG could be Allen, Conway, Williamson, Phillips, Neesham, Chapman, Satner, Sodhi, Southey, Ferguson, and Bolt. What can we expect from both teams heading into their next matches of this ICC T20 World Cup for 2022? Australia will be looking to bounce back in their next match against Sri Lanka on October the 25th at the Perth Stadium. They will need to address and fix the problems they have with their batting and bowling. New Zealand will be looking to continue the winning momentum heading into their next match against Afghanistan on October the 26th at the MCG. New Zealand will know that they can't be complacent against Afghanistan and always look to improve on all areas of their game. What a game to begin the Super 12 stage of this ICC T20 World Cup for 2022. New Zealand will gain lots of confidence over this victory against Australia and has set them up nicely for this T20 World Cup. Australia will be disappointed with this result, but as we know, this Australian team love being under pressure and having their backs up against the wall. And this crushing defeat could kickstart them back on course as they look to defend their title. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode. Be sure to subscribe and click the bell to get the latest episodes of the podcast, and like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Until next time, keep safe and bye for now.